In class, one of the big topics we have is Britishness. We talk about what does it mean to be British. We talk about Brexit. We talk about the monarchy and about multiculturalism in Britain. I thought for this video I'd call one of my friends in England. This is Ciara, who I met in Cambridge, and I will ask her about all of these topics and see what she's got to say on these topics. Let's go. First of all, to give us a little bit of background, whereabouts in the UK are you from?
I am from Belfast, which is in Northern Ireland, and I lived there for about 18 years. So I very much feel part of Northern Ireland in terms of my kind of heritage. And then I moved over to England in 2003 to attend university in a city called Newcastle upon Tyne, which is in the northeast of England. So I studied there and I moved after university to the city of Cambridge in the south of England for a few years, but I just really missed the northeast. So I came back up to Newcastle in 2015 and I've been here ever since.
Okay. When we spoke about this video, or making this video, we talked about Britishness. Like when somebody says a British or a Britishness, what comes to your mind first?
Um, so instinctively, I feel like what comes to my mind is somebody who lives in or has come from England. So not necessarily Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland, but I associate Britishness with England. And also when I hear the word Britishness, I very much think of patriotic
Right.
Britishness. Yeah.
So how do you personally feel about this Britishness? Like you're from the UK, so I guess technically you are British. Do you feel British?
It's a really interesting question, actually, and really relevant for somebody from the north of Ireland, because that question can be answered differently depending on your religious background if you're from the north of Ireland. So I'm Catholic, and I very much consider myself Irish, not British. And although Northern Ireland's part of the UK, it's also part of the island of Ireland. So growing up, had an Irish passport. I went to Catholic schools. I learned about England and I learned about Britishness as somebody from the north of Ireland, but I still very much to this day would think of myself as not British. I think of myself as Irish. I have a little girl who was born in England. Her dad is English, but she also has an Irish passport too. So I like to think of her as my little Irish girl.
Right, that's sweet. So, is this when you talk about this issue, or would you talk about this issue at all? Like down in Cambridge, of course, I guess that's pretty English part of the UK. Is this Would this feel awkward discussing that with other people who consider themselves British or English, or is this easygoing?
Oh, it definitely can be awkward. Again, it depends on kind of your peer group or the people, the context of that conversation. Um, Obviously, I mentioned previously about that answer to the question of Britishness being different depending on your religious background. So even if you had that conversation in Northern Ireland with somebody who was born in Northern Ireland but was of a Protestant religion, they would very much consider themselves British, and it might become quite a difficult conversation. In terms of England, people would automatically assume that I would consider myself British and that I would have a British passport. But obviously, I'm, quite quick to correct them in that. And yeah, it can become a bit of a debate, but it doesn't always have to be.
You spent some time in the south of England and you live in the north of England now. Do you see a big difference between North and South England?
Yeah, I definitely do.
Uh,
Um, I wouldn't like to offend anyone from the south of England, but I find the north of England culturally much more open and warm and welcoming, much like where I'm from. Um, I find the south of England less so. And in my time spent living in Cambridge, I don't feel like I made as many friends as I might have thought I did, or, it was just a little bit harder to um, kind of get into those sort of peer social work groups. Um, I feel like the north is just a bit more warm and welcoming.
okay.
And certainly in terms of there's a big economic gap um, in the north and the south of England too. That kind of pull of London and the sort of the wealth and financial aspects in the south are kind of much, I don't know, much greater, much more opportunity in terms of that kind of financial wealth in the south than the north. Maybe that's why we're just a bit more warm and welcoming, because we know we just got to crack on with it.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Of course, connected to this whole topic of do you feel British, do you feel English, is the idea of do you feel European? And that then, of course, leads to the idea on the topic of Brexit. How did you experience that whole Brexit debate?
I find it all really sad. I personally voted to remain in the EU. I spent a year living in Spain as part of my university degree. I've spent a lot of time traveling around France, Portugal, Germany, the Netherlands. Um, and again, being from Ireland, we feel very connected to that larger picture of being European and part of, the European community, and people from Europe are our neighbours and our friends and our family. So I find the whole debate really sad. And also having a daughter, I thought about the impact that that might have on her when she's older, and what would her view of it all be looking back, and why why the country made that decision to leave that EU family and community. Which is another reason why I was quite adamant that my daughter had an Irish passport,
Right.
because it means she will be those restrictions will be imposed less on her if she wants to, which I would encourage her to do, travel around Europe when she's older. So I still feel really sad about it, and I wish it hadn't happened, and I wish we could reverse the decision and go back to being one big happy European family.
Oh, so do I.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I know that people, of course, felt strong or still feel strongly about it. Is it a topic that causes a lot of like arguments, or would you say that by now it's settled and people don't, fight about it anymore, or is that still sort of an issue?
I think people feel a little bit defeated by it, in that there was a time in this country where we still felt like our action would have an impact. But it certainly feels like that chapter's closed now, and there's a resignation to the fact that, for those of us that voted to remain, certainly there's a resignation as to the fact that this is now happening, and we have to just kind of
Deal with it.
deal with it and move on accordingly. Yeah, but it's still, it's still talked about, certainly much less so now than it was a few years ago. But you tend to find that in your echo chamber,
Right.
you talk to people that have the same views as you, so there's less of a kind of debate that goes on in that sense.
So is it because you're speaking about that, mentioning that echo chamber? So is it that the people around you, the people you work with, the people who are your friends, is it true that mostly these people would have the same view on this topic?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so.
So
Yeah.
that is that for you personally, you didn't know really many people who voted to leave. Is that, could you say
I
that?
don't,
Or
yeah, I don't think I know anybody that voted to leave. I think it became quite a divisive subject. Um, and I think there's a lot to do with one's own kind of heritage, upbringing, views on the world, openness to others, that dictated one way or the other.
right, right,
And I certainly feel like the people I know and spend time with would be the kind of people that would not want to leave.
right, right. That makes sense.
Hmm.
Well, part of being British also is, I guess, having a king or a queen, having a monarchy. Um, you said you don't feel very British. How do you feel about the monarchy then?
I quite ambivalent, like I don't really mind that they exist. I don't really feel anything, I don't have any strong feelings towards them. I find the history and the story of the monarchy really fascinating.
Right.
And I don't know if you have this program in Germany, but we have The Crown on Netflix,
Yeah.
which gives, yeah, a really nice kind of potted history of the story of the royal family. And I think as individuals and as humans and as people, they're interesting. Some more so than others. I don't think about them
Yeah.
in my life. I don't kind of feel upset when something happens necessarily. I don't celebrate any of those royal days
Right.
like some of my kind of British friends might. Um, so yeah, I think ambivalent is probably the best response to that question. I think the Queen seemed quite nice,
So do I.
you
So
know.
I.
Yeah, seemed like a nice lady, like she would be a nice grandma. That's
Exactly.
about as far as I think. There's not much more than that, really.
Yeah, yeah. The last topic I'd love to hear your opinion on is we also in school we speak about the fact that of course the UK is a multicultural place, that people immigrate for different reasons from different places. In your everyday life, do you feel like your surroundings are very multicultural?
Um, Less so in Newcastle and the northeast and where I live. Um, as a city and as a community, we're not hugely multicultural. Not like some of the bigger cities in England, like London, Birmingham, Manchester, for example. Um, Interestingly, though, my organisation that I work for would be really multicultural, and we have a really wide variety of people from all different parts of the world, all different walks of life. We actually support people to relocate to England from other countries to work for our organisation, so that kind of melting pot just keeps growing, which is lovely. Um, I think just Newcastle's not one of those cities that has that variety necessarily.
Right.
Actually like Belfast as well, where I'm from. Um, and I suppose some of the impacts of Brexit and government policy recently have meant that possibility to become more multicultural has diminished because people are less keen or less inclined or less able
Right.
to move to some of the cities in the UK that they formerly might have considered um, relocating to or spending the rest of their lives in. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, I would say.
What would you think? What is it like as a foreigner from, let's say, a non-EU country, let's say, even one of the former colonies, to come to the UK and live there? Do you think they, of course, this is your perspective, your view, but would they experience a lot of xenophobia or even racism, or would you say it is not strongly present in everyday life?
I think that's really hard for me to answer actually because I'm not a
Right.
foreigner, and I actually maybe, naively don't know what people necessarily experience. I would think, I would sensibly think that they probably do experience quite a high level of um, bias, racism, whether that's conscious or unconscious. Um, but I certainly know that, those of us that welcome people from other countries here want to do our best to make sure that they feel part of, that they feel British,
Right.
that they feel part of this country, that they feel a sense of belonging. That's certainly really important to me. I know there will be groups in society that feel completely differently than that and who can take that out on people that aren't from this country and certainly kind of rally against them, which, makes me feel really sad and ashamed. Um, but I would say that question would probably be very differently answered if you asked somebody who was a foreigner
Right.
that had moved to England and wanted to be part of the British economy.
Right. Of course. All right, to finish this up, what is your hope for Britain for the future? Like, what do you think is important for the country to focus on at the moment?
There is so much. There is too much. I don't know if you or your students would be aware, but we're experiencing quite a lot of industrial action in Britain at the moment.
Yeah,
The government is in a bit of disarray. There's general sense and a feeling of dismay and uncertainty and chaos. So I think for me, ultimately, some stability, and that looks like a different sitting government in England, in Britain, for me personally. Um, because I just hope that my daughter doesn't have to deal with some of these uncertainties and um, challenges that a large part of our country is having to deal with at the moment. Um, so I think just a bit of peace and stability would be lovely.
yeah, it's been quite a
Yeah,
decade, hasn't
it
it?
has, hasn't it? Yeah, yeah, you could say that.
Okay, Kira, thank you so much for
My
talking to
pleasure.
me, and have a good day, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Ciara, for making this video with me. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.
English with Mr. B.